Welcome, Emily Carney. We are excited to talk with you a little bit today about some of your enthusiasm for space. But for our listeners who are meeting you for the first time, can you kind of share a little bit about who you are and how you came to be involved with space in general?
Well, obviously, my name's Emily Carney. I'm by trade, I'm a journalist. I'm a journalist and a writer. And really, how I became I guess we're gonna have to go way back. How I became interested in space. I grew up in Florida. I kind of right by, you can see right now, I have my space shuttle shirt on. I grew up during the early space shuttle program and during the 80s. And when I was a kid, I was very little, like I was a toddler. And my mom took me outside to see a space shuttle launch as a kid. And I think it was, I believe it was STS-2. It was the second shuttle launch. And I was real little, but I still remember that because for me, that was just like a, whoa, like,
Yeah.
like just seeing it even from where we lived a little ways out, but you could still see it pretty clearly. It really changed my life. And I became a little space nerd, kind of. I was a total nerd as a kid. I really was into like just space and space shuttles and all that. And as an adult, as I grew older, I wouldn't say I got out of it, but life happened. And when I was young, when I got out of school, I joined the Navy, and I was a Navy nuke for 6 years, which means I didn't run the whole thing, but I helped to run a aircraft carrier nuclear propulsion system. So, a few years after I got out of the Navy, I was still kind of a nomad. Like I was looking for a career. I tried teaching, didn't really enjoy it. I didn't really know what to do. And I was like, man, what do you love? Like one day I sort of leveled with myself and I'm like, what do you really love? And I was like, you love space. Like you love space flight history. That's what you love. You love to talk about it. You love to geek out about it with people. Mm-hmm. And at the time, this is how naive I was. I thought nobody's into that. Nobody likes that. Nobody's going to get into that, but whatever. So I did start a blog called This Space Available, which is actually on the National Space Society blog roll now, but I started it in 2010. And I was very surprised. Within a short time, I gained a lot of readers for it, which shocked me because I was like, man, nobody likes space, man. That's just nerd stuff.
Well, I thought your comment about Gene Cernan, you have to share that because that's so funny, right?
Yeah, I'll share it. And in 20, I'll share the Cernan comment now. Not a few years ago, like I think 11 or 12 years ago, I went to a astronaut scholarship foundation event at Cape Canaveral, or not in Cape Canaveral, Kennedy Space Center. And they had an autograph show, and that was when this is kind of sad. All the Apollo guys were still alive. Now there's not many of them. But I went to Gene Cernan's table, just to shake his hand. I wasn't seeking an autograph or anything. And he's like, he's Gene Cernan. He's like, so what do you do for a living? What do you do? And, I was like, oh God. And I was like, well, I run a space blog. I write a space blog. And he had no idea what a blog was. He just looked at me like, huh? And he's like, what the hell is a space blog? And I was like, oh God. So that's kind of become my tagline.
Right. No, it was so funny to read it because you can almost like envision, trying to share new technology with someone who is well renowned in their field, but doesn't up on that new stuff.
That's and for all let's say the under 30 crowd that doesn't know their Apollo history, Gene Cernan was a Navy captain, and I believe he was the last human to set foot on the moon. And so he's an Apollo 17 commander.
Yeah, he was a legend. And it's funny when I tell that story because people are like, man, that sounds rude. And I'm like, he wasn't being rude. He genuinely had no idea what a blog was. No idea. He was like 80. Why would he know that?
No, right. That's what I'm thinking. I think of my grandparents, and they were like, what do you mean cable television? Like,
what do you mean?
I'm gonna drop a funny story that is right in line with what you just said. Hung out with Fred Hayes a couple of times, and he had and this is just a few years ago, and he had a really cheap flip phone. And he flipped it open in front of the kids, and he goes, you guys know why I have a flip phone? And they were like, we have no idea. He
Yeah.
goes, I fall down a lot and I break phones. So I have a flip phone
Wow.
to keep from breaking phones.
Oh, but that's not funny now. That has
No,
a weird
but-
twist of the falling down part makes it less funny.
He's like, I break phones. He was very, you know, I'm not saying it because we were making fun of him. He
No,
was
I know.
laughing about it. And
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
he, you know, these guys were, you know, obviously they were consummate engineers and extreme. But I agree with you. You know, my favorite's Charlie Duke. I did convince the school we were at prior to this one to bring Charlie Duke and his wife to the school for a couple of days. So that's like precious time, because I think now, you know, there's 4 moonwalkers left and they're all upper 80s or 90s, and they don't do as much as they used to.
So how long did you do your blog? I've done a few blogs. Now we have some students who do it, but I was never great at it, even though I like writing.
And what do you write about mostly?
Well, mostly I've done this Space Available. That blog, it used to be on Blogger back in the day.
That's what mine were, Blogspot or something like that before.
Yeah, and now it's on the NSS. It's on the National Space Society, so you can read it there. All the old entries, I believe, are still on there as well. So I've been doing it for almost 13 years now, regular on a somewhat regular basis. There were some breaks in there, but I've been keeping at it for about 13 years. I have another blog on Medium, and it's called The Making of an Ex-Nuke. There's a book by Brian O'Leary, a former astronaut, called The Making of an Ex-Astronaut. So it's kind of a nod to that book. But I've been doing that one for about 2 years, and that's more stuff that might not necessarily fit into space history, sort of odds and ends. But mainly what I write about is space history, and I've covered all types of, you know, space history. You know, I've tried to cover, you know, even a little bit, not as much because I can't say I'm an expert on this area, but even like Soviet or Russian space history, I've tried to cover a little bit of what goes on internationally. I've written about you know, European space history, because a lot of Americans aren't really aware of what their program is like.
Right.
Mainly I focused I say mainly, but I've kind of developed an expertise, I guess, for Skylab, which is the first American space station. I guess that's kind of what I'm known for writing about. So I love Skylab. I was not alive during Skylab, but I love it just because it was awesome. It was the first space station ever. It really taught people how to live and work in space. And I've been writing more lately about the space shuttle program, just because I think now, since the shuttle program has been over for, 12 years, that's crazy to me. I think now we kind of have distance and objectivity to sort of look back at the program and, you know, its highs, its lows, and everything really it did. So I've been branching out a little bit into that, but mainly just space history, all kinds of space history. In the last few years, I've focused a lot on like diversity as well, you know, just because as a woman writer, I don't think I ever really wrote about some of the challenges that I personally faced, you know, going out there. I mean, it's 2023 and I've still have, you know, I'm not going to cuss, but I've had knuckleheads say stupid things to me, you know, at events, like, you know, like, oh yeah, this article's good for a woman and stuff.
Wow.
I still put up with crap like that. And there's still bozos out there. Excuse my language.
Yeah.
You know,
they're still stuck in that generation.
They're probably the same people that write like the episodes of Star Trek that DC Fontana wrote, not knowing that that was a woman that used
had to use her initials because otherwise it would have been published.
Let me ask. I want to ask one question about the blogs, and then I have a couple of Skylab questions I'd love to ask. One, what is the typical frequency that you like to write? Are you a 2 blog a month person, or are you once a week, or you get caffeinated and do like more than one a week?
Oh gosh. Well, it really depends. Right now I'm in between full-time work. I'm actually looking for a full-time job right now, but I do some part-time work during the week. And lately, I've been writing a lot. I've usually been writing 1 or 2 articles a week. And really, I wish I could say I have, a specific schedule. And I think if you're starting out as a writer, it does help to have maybe a content calendar or like a specific schedule of, okay, I'm going to write
a day that it's going to drop. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't say, honestly, I have used content calendars before, but most of the time with me, I just get inspired about a topic. If it's a long form article, usually I reach out to people, start interviewing them. It might take a few weeks to get all that together, depending, because I don't expect people to reply to me like the same day,
Right, of course.
So, but if it's something like a short blog and something I've kind of researched about already, I'd like to do a few a week. Usually it's just, for me, it's almost just like the middle of the night or waking dream type inspirations where you're like, man, I'd like to see an article about this. Okay, so why don't you just do it? That's usually how I function.
Right.
Ask your Skylab questions before I get to Space Hipsters, because I want to talk about some social
media. I had the really cool privilege because there was a guy in my fraternity. He was Skylab 4, Jerry Carr.
Awesome.
I got to meet him one time in Huntsville. And I wanted to ask you, I think Pete Conrad, wasn't he a commander? I think he was a commander of Skylab 2, maybe. And my question is this: the famous closest we've ever had to a space coup was Skylab, right? When they decided they were overworked and needed a break, maybe not a coup, but at least that interesting day where they decided they weren't going to work. Have you written about that? And is that something you'd like to share with our audience about?
Oh yeah, I've written a lot about it. I did a talk about it one year, and it was actually really cool because Ed Gibson, who also flew on Skylab 4, was with me on stage during the talk, which I didn't. Wow. Honestly, I was terrified of. I did not expect. But he is wonderful. I want to say Ed is a wonderful guy. I've written extensively about this. It's really been misreported a lot. The crew did ask for a real day off, and they got it, I believe, in early January 1974. Usually in the media, there's this December 29th date, which, to my knowledge, nothing happened on that date.
It seemed like New Year's Eve or close to it, right? Like,
maybe share just a little background with the audience so that they can understand the importance of this event, because it changed the trajectory, I think, for how we treat astronauts as humans instead of just working machines.
Oh, I'd love to talk about this because it's such a misreported thing that happened in space history. Basically, what happened was Skylab 4 they were the last Skylab mission. It was really the last big mission of science before the space shuttle would fly, which wouldn't be for many, many years. So, of course, on Skylab 4, they loaded them up with activities, experiments, you name it. Everybody wanted their experiment aboard that mission because it was the last one. So the guys got up there, and this is very common. About 50%, I think, roughly, of people get sick in space. One of the crew members, Bill Poe, got space sick. And this was a Thunderbird pilot. I mean, just a hard, somebody who had flown a lot, so he was not expected to get sick. They thought, oh, Ed Gibson will get sick. He's a scientist, right? Nope. Thunderbird got sick. So he was not feeling good the first few days of the mission. And kind of quickly, they started to fall behind, not because they weren't working hard enough, but because they just had so much on their plate. I mean, it was literally like, activity. It was just, their schedule was nuts, really. So they began to speak out about it, and Jerry Carr was the mission commander, great leader. He spoke up about it, and they did get a day off, I believe, in early January, but it didn't really solve the problem. The problem was that they just had, the schedule was just really crazy. So they did have sort of what Jerry Carr called a seance with the ground controllers, and they ended up reworking their schedule. So basically they wouldn't have any big experiments after dinner. You know, it was a more forgiving schedule and it worked better for them. And this worked beautifully. And when they returned in February 1974, they actually accomplished more than the second crew, which had been called the Super Crew. They actually accomplished more objectives. So the new schedule worked out great. And this was really important because, you know, as NASA was looking towards the space shuttle, which was going to have longer missions, you know, and possibly send people to other space stations, you know, NASA really had to figure out, okay, how are we going to manage workflows in space so we don't burn people out who are up in space for.
It sounds like an early, like a labor union kind of movement that was specifically in that microcosm of space. That's interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, and really a lot of, I hate to say the word, the media, because I'm part of the media as well,
Right.
But there's been a lot of misinformation about those events put out there. People are like, oh, they went on strike, they stopped talking to the ground. There's no evidence of that. If you examine the transcripts, they were, you know, straightforward with the ground controllers, but they weren't nasty or rude.
Yeah,
Wasn't
they were still doing their job.
like,
they needed.
So that was different than Wally Schirra when he refused to close his helmet on the way back, right?
A little bit, yeah. Schirra was a little more hostile. Yeah,
he had a stuffy nose for our listeners and didn't want to close his visor. So if the capsule depressurized, he would live. He wanted to be able to clear his nose on the way back. He ended up doing commercials for Sudafed too.
Oh,
yeah, that was a little different. That, I mean, I wouldn't say that was a strike, but that was more of a strike than Skylab,
right?
Yeah, or
it was definitely contentious.
Orders. Well, let's switch gears. So you've been doing the blog for a while, but you mentioned you also being with a background in media. It makes sense that you've now branched out to social media. And I've actually seen some of my friends who are sharing out Space Hipsters saying, so when I learned that you were Space Hipsters, I'm like, oh, I immediately thought of Steve Ports because I see him sharing all that stuff all the time. So tell us a little bit about Space Hipsters. You know, I love how your group got its name, for example, but really what it serves to do.
Well, Space Hipsters started, I pushed the button on it about 12 years ago. And really since then, the group has really just exploded in size. We have almost 43,000 people in it, I believe now, which to me is insane. We started with 4 people originally. And really our group exists to celebrate the past, present, and future of spaceflight. We're kind of a big tent group. When I say that, we don't focus just on space history. We focus on, you know, what's going on now, what we hope to see in the future. You know, we focus on a lot of different things. When it's appropriate, if it doesn't get too contentious, we've had a few posts about social issues as they relate to space, cultural issues as they relate to space, because I think all of us, I can't speak for everybody, but I think a lot of us can agree that as we branch further and further into deep space, such as with Artemis or future missions, that, you know, there are things that we're going to have to think about that go, you know, that kind of go beyond just, you know, okay, let's, you know, fire a big rocket and go to space. You know, there's going to be.
How are people going to live with others, but also, you know, emotionally and psychologically? And the differences that we're seeing here, of course, are going to, it's not like they go away.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and those are things we really need to think about. We got to think about, you know, how are different cultures going to relate to each other in space? Not everybody thinks or looks at things the same way. And that's not a bad thing. There's just going to be differences, you know, and how do we sort of, you know, put that all together so we can all coexist and work well together?
How do you force acceptance, right?
Exactly. And I think for some people that's difficult.
I did not read the book, but there's this Apple show, For All Mankind. Have you watched it? What are your thoughts on that?
I am obsessed with that show. I think it's awesome. It's an alternate history, but I think it's a really cool look at what could have happened had they extended Apollo beyond what it was. I think it's somewhat unrealistic, unfortunately, because I don't think in the 70s as people were ready for women moonwalkers. I wish they had been. It would have been freaking awesome had that happen.
Women still couldn't even get a credit card in their name in the 70s. It was the 80s, I think.
Well, let's be honest. The show's premise, when our guest says alternate reality, the Soviets beat the Americans to the moon. So America's now in catch-up mode, and then the Soviets in the storyline quickly put a woman on the moon, Tereshkova, or whoever the character was, and then NASA was like, we need to get with it. It was almost like an homage, I thought, to the Mercury 13.
Yep. I loved it. I love it. Molly Cobb is kind of my idol now.
She is a bad astronaut. You know what I mean? I mean, in a good way. She was tough. She had good leadership. She was willing to anyway, she's a great, I thought that character was well created, just well written, great character.
Yeah. I love that show. I love it. I think it's awesome. I can't wait to see season 4, but I'm a little terrified of what they're gonna do to everybody, because season 3 was very sad. I don't want to spoil it.
They put the NASA administrator. She's in Russia when season 3 ends. I know. I'm not giving away any secret because that was on last season's episode. So I'm glad that we share some interest there. That's a great show, though. You're right.
It is awesome.
So tell us a little bit about the philanthropy. I know that you mentioned that the group has been doing some help with some children else, in places that might not otherwise get the chance to go to space camp. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we've worked a lot. There's a nonprofit, and it's not our nonprofit. I want to make that clear. The nonprofit is called Taking Up Space, and it's run by a wonderful young woman named Zarina Salito. Oh my God, I screwed up her name. Zarina, I'm so sorry. I love you. But it's run by this awesome woman. And basically her idea is she wanted to create opportunities for young Native American women to go to space camp. And that's really right. For space hipsters, that's really something that's just right up our alley. Native American women especially are super underrepresented in
everywhere.
Flight and everywhere. Exactly. And, we really want to see young people, especially, underrepresented populations, go to space camp and develop an interest in, STEAM. I say STEAM because I include the arts and humanities in there as well. So that's something that, we kind of saw this a few years ago. We're like, man, it would be awesome to help this group. So we've had a lot of fundraisers since, I think, for the last 6 years. And we just had one we had a May the 4th celebration, and we had a lot of fundraising for that. I'm not sure how much we've raised total for Taking Up Space, but it's got to be somewhere in the ballpark of 25 grand. That's a guess. That's a guess. So we really love working with them, and we want to keep working with them for forever, hopefully, because we really believe in helping out that population, and just, and those kids are awesome. And we really want to see them go to Mars. We want to someday, when hopefully I'm a very old woman, I want to cut on the TV and be like, that's one of the girls we helped. That's one of them. Yeah. And she's on Mars. That would probably make my whole life. So that's something we are involved. We are, and hopefully I want to continue and be involved in that.
Does the organization that you support, do they select girls from any particular tribe, or is it sort of a national opportunity for children, girls from different tribes around the country?
I believe it's from different tribes. I don't think they focus on us like a particular tribe. I know the group is based in Tucson, so quite a few girls from that area, from Arizona, have been involved in it. But I believe it's I believe it's nationwide. So I believe any Native American young girl can get involved in that kind of group and and partake in it.
Cool. I'd love to pivot back to a Navy question, if I might.
That's fine. One question about the Native girls before we go. Before we pivot, yes. Are they planning to track the students that they're working with, so they can kind of see whether or not their exposure to the camp?
Study.
Yeah. Well, okay. Whether or not that exposure helped to encourage them to stay in the STEM fields or STEAM fields.
I believe so. I know Zarina is very involved and follows up with them. And she's also, she's involved with, these are girls that are under 18. So she's involved with their parents as well,
Right.
And things like that. So
Great
they
to be able to show
keep
that
up.
data that says that
She
early
does
involvement made
Yep.
the difference. Now you may pivot.
All right.
She does keep up with them. Yep,
Right.
absolutely.
So you worked on nuclear reactors on aircraft carriers. My question is, did you ever consider working on a submarine, which is about as close to a spacecraft as you can get on Earth?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, when I was in the Navy, women were not allowed on submarines when I was in. I did train on a sub reactor when I was in New York. I trained on a submarine reactor, which was interesting, very close tolerances, a lot of little hiding spots. So that was definitely a neat experience. But unfortunately, would I consider going on a submarine if I could do it again? Oh God, I don't know. That is a totally different environment from an aircraft carrier.
Right.
I mean, really, these people don't see the sun for at least with a carrier, you can go up on Vulture's Row and, you have the opportunity to see the sun. Yes, subs, nope. So I really can't answer that because I don't know if I would have done that or not. Those guys are hardcore.
I have one of my buddies from college. He was a submariner and he's odd. They're a unique type. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, they have interesting personalities. I've worked with some submariners on a carrier. There are a few of them who got disqualified for health reasons, and they came to the carrier. And some of them were really interesting. That's all I got to say about that.
Yeah. So you probably have opinions about how useful nuclear power is going to be on long-term spacecraft, use on Mars, where you get so far away, solar is not a good option. I guess you would agree nuclear is the way we have to get established on Mars.
I agree. I probably will get a lot of criticism for saying this, but it's my opinion that I think nuclear is actually pretty clean. And it's actually, when well done, it's pretty safe. I know people focus and they think, oh my God, 3 Mile Island. Yeah. That was one accident, and that happened 40 odd years ago. And, and it sucks that we've had incidences like that, but I think, and I wish it hadn't happened, obviously, but they've learned a lot since then, and how, okay, this is how operators need to act. This is how operators need to perform. And this is how systems need to be built and things like that. So I think nowadays it's probably the safest it's ever going to be, So I think honestly, nuclear is a great idea for extended space flight, just because when you get that far out, when you get further out in the solar system, I mean, let's face it, solar panels just aren't going to work at a certain point.
They're not efficient, right? It's too, they're too big, yes. My last question is in the lane of, you've got these great organizations that you either created, run, or support. How has your experience with the National Space Society either accentuated or enhanced what you've done, or is it something that you're hoping to increase the depth of the relationship? And I'll just sort of leave my question there because I'm not sure what direction you'd like to go with it.
No, that's a great question. I love the National Space Society. I've gotten a lot of great opportunities through the National Space Society. My blog is on their website, which is a huge honor for me, and I've done a lot of writing for them and Ad Astra, the magazine. I would like to further expand my relationship with them if possible at all. What I really love about the NSS for me is it's really opened my eyes. I'm used to writing about space history, and you tend to look back at the past and things. And I'm becoming very interested in looking towards the future. And I think the NSS really focuses a lot on space settlement and long-term space habitation. And I'm really interested in those topics. I'm a big fan of Gerard K. O'Neill. I'm a big fan of his. I've written a lot about him. And I really think that I think that, you know, that is, to me, and this is another thing where people hear me and they're like, she's nuts. I really think the goal of space flight is long-term space settlement and space habitation, just because, you know, there's going to be a point, it may not be in our lifetimes or
Right.
my niece and nephew's lifetime. They're real young. There's going to come a point where, you know, we're going to have to leave Earth. Earth has only a limited number of resources, and we can't, unfortunately, we're blowing through
We
them.
exploit them. Yep.
Yep, we're blowing through them, and
Right.
we've got to, there's got to be another way. And I think space flight is going to be the key to that. I honestly do.
Now you sound like Mr. Zubrin, who I was so happy to meet at ISDC last week.
Yeah, I bought his not Mars. I'm sorry.
The
I have
nuke
his
one, I bet.
book. I bought his nuke book.
Yeah,
I
the new
did
one
buy
we
his
saw
nuke
there.
book.
Yeah, no, Kevin was like, he had to go get that once he already has, so that
I got
Super can sign them.
I bought the case for Mars and the case for space, and he signed them. So I was like, I'm actually going to use one of those books in a middle school aerospace class.
That's awesome.
As the textbook. I'm going to use the case for space in the class as the textbook next year.
Awesome.
Well, as we get set to close here for the day, we want to, first of all, thanks for spending this time with us, but also want to give you the opportunity to share out if our listeners are interested in checking out Space Hipsters or any of the blogs. I know you mentioned on National Space Society on their website, but where can someone go to learn more about what you're doing?
Space Hipsters is on Facebook. On Facebook, it's just I think it's facebook.com/group/Space Hipsters if you want to join it. We do have a couple of questions, nothing heavy. If you want to check out my blog, it's called This Space Available. I think it's space.nss.org/this space available.
Yeah, and I'll put a link in the chat.
And I do have one on Medium called The Making of an X-Nuke, and it's under my name, Emily Carney. So those are places that you can find me. I'm on all social media, mostly under my name, Emily L. Carney. So if you want to hit me up on there, go ahead. I am looking for full-time work. If there's anybody out there listening, please hit me up on social media. Just message me.
Well, that's an emerging job field, right? The idea of managing someone's social media sites. That's something my daughter actually graduated with a poli-sci degree, and that's what she loves doing it. She's actually making that. So that's fantastic.
And I think space is on the kind of the cutting edge of, you know, we're pioneering and we're perfecting it. I think. Yeah.
Well, I'll make sure that the link is in there when we share it out.
Thank you.
Emily, thanks again so much. It was a pleasure to talk with you today, and I have a feeling we'll be talking with you again in the future.
Absolutely. I would love to. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you very much.